Okay, without further ado, it is former federal prosecutor, now defense attorney, friend of the Mark Thompson Show, David Katz, everybody. Yay for David Katz. Hello.
Great to be with you, Kim.
Hi. I wish I could use the Katz, everybody wants to be a cat music, but we'll get copyright struck and, then I'll have to hire you as an attorney and the whole thing is just going to go straight downhill. So can't do it. But I'm so thankful to have you on the show today. How are you?
I'm fine. It's great to be with you. We had our great panel the other night with Mark from off the coast of South America, and you
Yeah,
and David K. Johnston, and your other guests too. All five of us
that was
talking about
great.
the Colorado Supreme Court decision
Yeah.
regarding barring Trump from being on the ballot in Colorado. Different and interesting points of view as that case moves forward. So, what's our topic today?
Let's start with what you just mentioned, which is the Colorado Supreme Court. Justices involved in that decision are now facing a flood of threats after they disqualified Trump from the ballot. We're talking death threats. There was one about "I'll kill your baby." I mean, horrible things are coming in, and someone, or more than one person, posted personal information of these justices, including their email addresses, the business addresses, their office, the addresses of their offices, and the violent comments and threats being made are very, very concerning. So I don't know if this is the new normal for justices, and even the woman who was a Colorado official who brought the complaint to the court says she's also having death threats against her. So I wonder if this is our new normal. Like, we just know that it's par for the course. If you bring one of these cases, you're going to be threatened and possibly have your life in peril.
Well, I hope it's not the new normal. And it's worth bearing in mind that these court staffs, maybe not so much some of the prosecutors, maybe not so much some other people in the system, but the judges themselves have tremendous protection, both in their chambers. They have security details. People are aware of this. If there's any ambiguity in the law or lack of funding, I'm sure that the Colorado legislature will make sure that there's proper funding to really not only protect the justices, but their staffs, members of their family. You can't have a government of intimidation. We can't have the sort of impunity or immunity that they have down in Mexico or in Latin American countries and some other countries that you hear about. And so these people who do their duty and stand up and do the right thing should absolutely be protected. And people who make actual threats, I don't mean to sound like a former assistant U.S. attorney and this is by the book, but absolutely. And this has, and the agents and so forth, the people who actually they're sworn officers, so they have guns. People say, "Oh my God, I can't believe it," when the IRS or the FBI special agents come to these houses and businesses, even on a white collar case. How come they're armed? Well, they're armed because there are some people, a tiny fraction, that are willing to resort to violence. And you cannot have hecklers' rights. You can't have threateners' rights. And the people who make actual threats have to be dealt with very seriously. It's a funny thing. People looking back on Trump, when Trump was the president, he had the Secret Service. Believe me, they're hyperactive. You make a threat against Donald Trump when he was president of the United States, believe me, you got a full-on criminal investigation. And that has to be the same, obviously not go overboard. Not if you have to get a search warrant, you have to get a search warrant, not harass people. But like you say, someone who says something, "I'm going to kill you and your baby," they have to figure out, you get a subpoena. These are not anonymous records. You get a subpoena for whatever media company they use to send out that message. You demand to know who's the subscriber on that account. You find out, you get to the bottom of this. I mean, believe me, they do this with some child pornography cases, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't. But if it's worth, investigating that, it's worth investigating threats on justices, Kim. It's worth investigating that kind of thing. And as to the Colorado justices, those are the ones that you're talking about.
Yeah.
They said in their opinion, this is an historic case.
Mm-hmm.
They had to do their duty. And I think all of them did their duty. The people who say it's all political, I mentioned this on the show the other night, 7 justices, all appointed by Democrats. And guess what? 3 of them thought there were legal issues in the case, and they voted in a way that pleased Trump. And 4 of them thought that there were legal issues in the case which were such that they voted in a way that displeased Trump. So I think that democracy acquitted itself very well. The rule of law acquitted itself very well. And my understanding is that if the Supreme Court doesn't take the case, if the Supreme Court does not, the US Supreme Court does
Yeah.
not grant a stay, then this on January 4 or 5 will go into effect. In other words, everyone's expecting the Supreme Court to either stay it,
Hmm.
reverse it. But if the Supreme Court truly takes hands off, I think the Colorado Supreme Court is going to say, well, here's January 4th. The US Supreme Court hasn't done anything to act on staying or reversing this case.
Right.
And I think at that point, they'll tell the Colorado Secretary of State, print the ballot on January 5th with
Hmm.
Trump's name off the Republican primary. That's what I think is going to happen. But again, if you're betting, I suspect they will intervene or stay in some way the US Supreme Court. And it will, I said the other night that it will embolden the other states.
Yeah.
It turns out that there are 15 or 16 other states where litigation like that is pending. The New York Times has a chart of it. And some of those are swing states. As I recall the chart, Arizona, some other states that are in play are still having judges there decide what they want to do with taking Trump's name off the ballot in those states. And the idea that it's so outrageous as such a case of first impression, you made this point. You read the Constitution and it says someone who was an insurrectionist. Now, people say it only refers to the Civil War. And what's so funny is that the textualists, the originalists, the ones who say that you can't ban guns in domestic violence situations because, well, historically,
Yeah.
originally, the Constitution wasn't that focused on domestic violence, because think of the era that we lived in then, the relationship between men and women. I think women were still considered property, right, of men. So to say, well, because the framers lived in that kind of a world, the Second Amendment bars doing anything about these domestic violence injunctions, I think the Supreme Court will rule the other way. But the people who say they're textualists, they're originalists, I
Mhm.
mean, read the 14th Amendment. It
It's
seems
right there.
clean on its face.
It's
Just
black and white, right?
read the text.
Yeah.
Read what it originally says. It bars an insurrectionist. And Mark made the point that, yes, it could be abused. But I
Hmm.
think the answer to that would be you would look at due process. You have a right not to be put in jail. You have a right not to be barred from running
Yeah.
for president under the due process clause. So some of the Texas just says, well, we don't like Biden, we're going to throw him off the ballot. That's obviously not due process. And if the trial were defective, if Biden weren't allowed to put on evidence that he was not an insurrectionist, that there'd never been any insurrection, Biden had nothing to do with encouraging people to raid the Capitol or do anything that was an insurrection, then of course that would fall, not because the Fourth Amendment is ambiguous or didn't call it out, but because you also have due process, and you can't be denied due process in any kind of legal proceeding. And that Texas, rushed to judgment to just throw Biden off the ballots because he was supposedly part of a non-existent insurrection, that would be thrown out, not in the language of the 14th Amendment, under due process, because Biden wouldn't have been given due process. Trump was given due process. He had a trial. He had a lot of witnesses. The judge made findings in the trial court, and those were affirmed by the Colorado Supreme Court, with a twist that they said that Trump was an officer. And I think it's obvious that the president occupies an office that makes him an officer of the United States. I thought that was a cop-out by the trial judge and
Right.
pretty plain and simple by the Colorado Supreme Court. So we'll see.
What's interesting is, and you talk about other states being able to do this, and there's word today, first of all, that California is now in a move trying to keep Trump off of our primary ballot. The attorney general, state lawmakers are calling on the attorney general to push for a court ruling on this. And Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis is turning to the Secretary of State to explore legal options. But I will say that in addition to that, and it kind of goes along with what you were just mentioning, is that there's a state senator who's introducing a bill next year that would let the California Secretary of State determine if presidential candidates are eligible or not. So the effort is basically to pick a person who decides who can appear on California's election ballots or not. That wouldn't be due process.
Yes, I think that this is getting very fraught and problematic.
Mhm.
I see all of Mark's arguments And all I can say is that the Colorado Supreme Court, I think, was on firm ground in this very unique case and the very unusual circumstance where Trump engaged and participated actively. We all saw it in an insurrection, which was a classic insurrection. It was an invasion of the Capitol to stop the transfer of power, to stop the proper certification of the vote. All the hypotheticals of, well, wasn't Black Lives Matter a demonstration, an insurrection? Wasn't the thing in Portland, Oregon? No, they weren't. They were absolutely not the insurrection. So I think for the US Supreme Court to say, well, this was not an insurrection, I don't think they're going to go there. But we'll have to see what happens with that one. I thought we were going to talk a little bit about San Francisco's.
Yeah, let's talk about that
Let's
too.
talk about that.
Well, first of all, let's talk about this federal judge blocking this California law that would have banned carrying firearms in most public places. This is a temporary blocking of this California law because they say it violates the Second Amendment of the Constitution and deprives people of their ability to defend themselves and their loved ones. This law was supposed to take effect January 1st. It was signed by the governor, it was ready to go. It would have banned people from carrying concealed guns in 26 places, including public parks, playgrounds, churches, banks, and zoos, and it would apply whether a person has a permit to carry a concealed weapon or not. So I guess that's banned, that's against the rules.
Well, there's some litigation over guns, which seems to always get low numbered or sent as a related case to a particular Second Amendment zealot on the federal bench. If this was one of the cases that got related and sent to that Second Amendment zealot, I think probably the decision will not stand.
It was U.S. District Judge Cormac Carney.
Well, oh, he's not. He's not the one that I was thinking of. We're going to have to see what the U.S. Supreme Court does with these gun cases. The pistol case from New York City was very troubling, but I thought the U.S. Supreme Court made clear that there could be limits on people going into bars with guns, going into Yankee Stadium with guns, going on the subways. And so by that analogy, I think that these public safety measures are still going to be good. I don't agree with this jurisprudence over the right to keep and bear arms, but even taking it for what I think the U.S. Supreme Court will do with it, I think that they will allow restrictions that enhance public safety, especially in very crowded places, in potentially violence-prone places like bars, amusement parks, anywhere where people are drinking, baseball stadiums. So, but I want to talk about the San Francisco federal judge, William Alsop, if you don't mind, because I know him.
Okay, so he rejected some plea deals for drug dealers in the Tenderloin, saying the plea deals are way too lenient.
Well, the first story I want to tell, because I think it's always, if it makes it human when the guest can say something about the human being that's involved in the big news story.
Right.
I had the privilege to work in the Solicitor General's office in Washington, D.C. as a summer clerk. And it attracted some of the most brilliant people in government as permanent employees. I was a summer clerk there, but I got to meet so many of these brilliant people. And you may say this is male privilege or good athlete privileges, but I was always a very good softball player. So when they saw how good the summer clerk was on the softball team, I got to know everybody, including I got to know William Alsop, who drove me home one night from the softball game to where I was living. And I got to chat with him, for 20 minutes in the car. The most charming, charismatic person. I'm so happy for him that he made it to the federal bench. He was really one of those people I've met in my career, like Adam Schiff, who I said, this is somebody who deserves the position that they hold, the accolades that they've received. I know some people don't give Adam Schiff accolades, but I think that he's very worthy of him. And he's another person I know much better than William Alsop. Anyway, Alsop went on to be a U.S. district judge. His heart is absolutely in the right place. And, this is a very interesting situation because a lot of people who sell fentanyl, as deadly as it is, in street sales, who may be addicts themselves, don't get prosecuted at all in federal court. And so they set up these federal task forces. And the idea is that the feds should get together with the local and state officials and do something about it. then of course they're entitled to vigorous defense. They're entitled to have a very good federal public defender or a private attorney if they can somehow afford one. And that person wants the very best for their client. So they say, it's so unusual that my client's even being charged in federal court. He's not a big time drug dealer. Yes, he's selling fentanyl. That's terrible. But he's selling it basically to feed his own habit, or it's very low level. And so I won't agree to any big sentence. I'll agree to my guy will get probation and he'll have a federal conviction. He's being treated so much worse than other people. He's ending up with a federal conviction. But I'll only agree to the plea agreement if he gets no time, has to be approved by the federal judge. That was one of the problems that Hunter Biden's having when he says, I thought I had this deal, I thought I had that deal. The deals have to be approved by the federal judge, almost always in federal court. And so these deals had to be approved by the federal judge, and it lands in front of ALSUP. You're going to end up with a conviction. You're not going to get diversion. You're not going to get a program like you would have in state court. You're going to have a serious criminal federal record for the rest of your life, okay? But you're not going to get jail time. ALSUP looked at it. He thought the younger person ought to get 4 months in prison, and he thought the older person ought to get over a year in prison, but he didn't think that either of them should get no time, and he said so, and he rejected the plea agreements, which means that what's going to happen now is the government may drop the cases altogether. They may say for the amount of work that the prosecution has to do in a federal case, right? The motions that a criminal defense attorney could bring in federal court, you know what? We have other things. We have these huge computer frauds. We have big time drug dealers. We, the federal prosecutors, want to do other things with our resources. So we may drop the whole case. And that's what's so problematic here. You have to realize the alternative for some of these people, even these low-level fentanyl dealers, is not, well, they'll be prosecuted and imprisoned in state court. The reality is the law has been changed to the point, and I think that the attitude of the judges and the system in the state court in San Francisco is that you do get diversion. It's not like you go to prison over there, and so the judge is saying you should go to prison here. At the same time, he says, my God, I think this is sort of his thinking. His thinking is, if these people go back to Honduras, where apparently a lot of them are from, and they tell all their friends, if you think you need to be scared about federal prosecution so you'll be deterred, let me tell you, I got to stick my head in the lion's mouth, and the lion didn't really bite. Yeah. I got a federal case. I know what it's like to pick up a federal case, and guess what? I got no time. And I think Judge ALSUP was really worried that if that story goes back to Honduras, people will be not deterred at all from coming up to San Francisco and selling drugs. And the impact of fentanyl has been awful. Over 800 people have died this year in San Francisco alone, not the Bay Area, in San Francisco alone. Think about that number of people, more than half of them from fentanyl. So I think Judge ALSUP and some other judges on the court, they just wish that more were being done. They just wish that these people, but at the same time, there are limited federal resources, and the federal prosecutors, and I was one, and I was the head of one of these task forces, and we were going after not fentanyl, we were going after investment fraud, that kind of thing. If I can mention one more name, my successor was Ali Mayorkas, who went on to be the head of DHS and gets screamed at by the Republicans in Congress all the time. But when you run one of those task forces, you want to bring the best that can be brought. So the idea was that if we found this huge investment fraud, we, the feds, would prosecute the leaders of it. But the guys who were just selling on the phone that had been around from one boiler room or investment scam to another, maybe they'd been barred by the state prosecution. So the state prosecutors could do something about them violating their injunctions. Meanwhile, some of the people had warrants. So the local cops would show up and say, hey, buddy, guess what? We got a warrant for your arrest. So we're taking you out in handcuffs from the boiler room right now. The idea is that we would all work together. And I guess the idea is to bring this fear of federal prosecution, which is a strong deterrent. And then Judge ALSUP says, this is not working. We're sending the wrong message when these people, I assume that somehow they didn't get bail. I mean, you'd think the person would have not gotten bail and already served 4 months. So that wasn't reported very well. But I think Judge ALSUP thought that this sends a message. If you don't get any federal prison sentence and you go back to Honduras, this sends the absolute worst message to the people that the cartel would recruit to go up to San Francisco, sell fentanyl, and even if you pick up a federal case, you won't get time.
Does it also send a message to the prosecutor in the case saying that, listen, you might decide not to move forward with these cases, but the next time you make a plea deal and you bring it in front of me, it better not be one of these too lenient, get off scot-free kind of cases, or we're going to be in the same boat again. So now maybe it tells the prosecutor they have to do a little bit more.
Well, the prosecutor is going to say to the federal public defender or whoever the attorney is for one of these folks, one of these defendants, say, look, I know you want no jail time, but it's got to be a year. It's got to be a year. By the way, these people are facing a 20-year maximum, I think, or at least a 10-year maximum. So if, maybe it emboldens, it strengthens the hand of the prosecutor to say to the criminal defense attorney, hey, look, a year's not going to work. The judge won't accept it at all. But you also worry because of the real situation that's going on, Kim, that some of the federal prosecutors will just say, look, there's so many resources. When I represent somebody, I look for every motion that is, legitimately one that can be brought. I look at the discovery to see what kind of problems there are in them not turning over the discovery. And if somebody is really painstaking and scrutinizes one of these cases, they may feel like you can make a lot of work for the prosecutor. So if they can fast track these cases, if there's not a lot of work, if it's like sign on the dotted line, you could be getting 10 or 20 years, you're getting a very low sentence, you're getting a federal conviction, sign on the dotted line. I think, yes, they'll say to them, sign on the dotted line for a year. If you can't sign on the dotted line for no time because you see the judges, even the liberal judges here, the compassionate judges won't accept it. And as a former federal prosecutor, I, of course, buy into this whole thing that it is compassionate to properly enforce the criminal laws, because you have to always think of the victims and society, not just the individual defendant who may have a hard luck story or his or her family may have a hard luck story, but look at the people who are impacted by crime, whether it's investment frauds or whether it's fentanyl.
Yeah, agree. David Katz, thank you for being on the Mark Thompson Show. You're so awesome.
You're so awesome. It's great to be with you, Kim. I'm glad I could make it today. We have huge rain down here, and I barely made it, but I did. Great to be with you.
Awesome. Thank you, David Katz. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.